Going to call to order the regular Planning Commission meeting for the City of West Covina for Tuesday, January 23rd, 2018. If you're here to speak on any item, both agendized or non-agendized item, please make sure to fill out one of the speaker cards that are here at the podium. Fill it out, give it to staff, they will give it to us, and we'll go on ahead and add you to the rotation. All items this evening that are agendized, staff will call you during those particular items. If, again, you want to speak during non-agendized item, we will have a moment for that at the conclusion of the approval of minutes. With that said, let's move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. It would be given by Commissioner Castellanos.
Please rise, place your hand on your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's take a moment of silent prayer and meditation. Thank you. Roll call.
Commissioner Hing, Commissioner Holtz, Commissioner Redholtz.
Here.
Commissioner Castellanos.
Here.
And Commissioner Menes.
Present. Next item, approval of minutes for the December 12th, 2017 meeting. Any comments, corrections? Okay, none noted. The minutes will stand approved as presented by staff. Moving on to oral communication. And once again, this is the time when members of the public may speak to the Commission on any matter within the scope of duties assigned to the Commission relating to non-agendized item. If you have or you want to speak during this time, please make sure to step up to the podium and fill out one of the speaker cards. No one wanting to speak under oral communication? Please, sir, do you want to come up to the... Is it for a non-agendized item?
For agendized. Just hand us the card. He'll call your name at the time.
I turned in a card. Okay, Jim, correct? Yeah, for item number 4. Okay, we have you here. We'll go on ahead and put you in for a study session number item 4. So let the record reflect there are no speakers here under oral communication. We will now then move on to consent calendar. There's a request for extension of time for a precise plan 14-01 and conditional use permit 1405 for the property at 1030 East Merced Avenue. This is for the West Covina Montessori Academy. Jeff, I know this is a consent calendar, but I believe one of the fellow commissioners here, Commissioner Redholtz, may have a few comments or questions related to the matter.
That's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have, I'm most likely going to go ahead and, support this, but I have a question. I seem to remember, well, let me ask you, is it typical when somebody comes forward with a request like this that they come here to get approval first and then they go loan shopping? Or do they come in with financing in place and then seek approval? Or is there a pattern?
Yeah, I have to apologize, Commissioner Reynolds. I'm not sure that's something that staff is fully aware of. We don't usually talk to people about their financing options or where they're at with that. So I have a feeling that it goes either, some cases it's one way, in some cases another. Okay,
because I remember, when this applicant was at the commission that, they were, the school was growing and expanding and, we need this modular building and because it's cheaper to do that than, build a traditional building. And the reason they're giving for this second extension is exactly the same as the first year, that they just are unable to cobble it together to get the funding. So, it just comes to mind that, if they're at that point, which is like 2 years ago, they're, growing and expanding and they needed the room so badly, what are they doing with those, with those students? Or anyway, it just seems like when they come forward that, it'd be nice if they, had funding ready to go.
It works a lot smoother when that occurs that way. I think in terms of options you have, you can approve this tonight. You could also ask to be held over and placed on the next agenda and ask them to come if you want to speak with them. I don't think we have any representatives for them here tonight.
Commissioner Redholz, would you like to consider staff's recommendation?
I would, you know what, I would like to, if I have support for it, I would like to ask the applicant.
Yeah,
Commissioner
I
Castellanos?
agree. I was going to have a few questions about that. I mean, maybe they just need simple guidance on financials or something, but I was going to ask them similar questions if they were here. So I would support that. I think even giving them
I'll go ahead and make that
guidance.
motion then.
Yeah,
Motion to
and I'll
continue.
second that.
So that's to continue to the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
With the idea, obviously, of the applicant being present
Being
to
present,
answer a few
yes.
questions. Okay. Do you need a roll call, Jeff? or-
No, I think a simple vote would be fine.
I guess the vote?
All in favor?
Yes, all in favor?
Aye.
That's 3 ayes.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to public hearings, this is item number 3 on the agenda. This is a code amendment 1602, categorical exemption. The applicant is the city of West Covina. For all citywide property, it's a request related to temporary signage. Staff, do you have a presentation? Okay.
Yeah, there. Didn't think about the microphone until I got up here. So we're going to be presenting the code amendment. Let me get to the right spot. For, it's 1602 for temporary signs. Proposal is to amend the municipal code to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling of Reed v. Town of Gilbert and other cases relating to the First Amendment protection for signs. So that's what this is about. It came about because of a lawsuit in Arizona that the city lost. And we do have Scott Porter from our city attorney's office for questions about that, because this is mostly being done to comply with this court case and federal requirements then. So the city council initiated this code amendment on February 16, 2016. So, and I would apologize in one sense that we didn't really have a study session on this. It's fairly simple and straightforward what's being proposed to do, and it's also, there's not a lot of options for most of the things. We're just simply complying with law. The plaintiff in the Reed case argued that Gilbert's sign code violated the First Amendment as content-based regulation. So Gilbert's sign code, the town of Gilbert's sign code designated several categories of non-commercial signs for different treatment. Ideological signs, political signs, temporary directional signs, and garage sale signs were among the categories singled out in Gilbert's sign code. So those are categories that they said you can't regulate based on content from those type of signage. The court held that on its face value, the town's sign code is content-based regulation of speech, and thus there was no need to consider government's justification or purposes for enacting the code to determine whether it is subject to strict scrutiny, because you can't legislate content-based speech. Thus, the town's code was invalidated, at least in part, leaving no regulations in place on categories of sign covered by the code. So we don't want to end up in that situation, so we want to address this progressively. Planning staff has worked with the city attorney's office to prepare the amendments to this municipal code. The sign standards section of the municipal code includes standards for all types of signs and is quite lengthy. So it's going to seem like I'm going through the whole code, but believe me, I'm not. We're only touching maybe a tenth of the code. The sign code is 60 pages long. The sign standards are located in Chapter 26, Article 7. The proposed amendments affect some of the temporary sign standards. We're just going to cover those. And I'm going to go through the changes, and what you see, I'll give you sort of a summary of what's going to happen. You see on the screen behind you. This is what we're trying to address, and this is how we're addressing in the code. So this is cut straight from the code. When it's underlined, it means we're adding it. When it's crossed out, it means we're subtracting it. In this case, you're just seeing something added, but you will see some where there's no changes, not underlined or crossed out. In those cases, there's no change to that portion of the sign code. So I just wanted to cover that. I'm not going to read through this. I'm going to word for word, especially not the changes to the code. I'm going to cover the bold type, and then I will pause if there's any questions. Just momentarily, if there's any questions, please interrupt me as we go. And just for this public's sake, there will be after the presentation, there'll be a chance for the public to speak if you'd like to. So this section of the sign code provides the purpose and findings that support the sign standards. The amendment would add subsection F that would provide a finding on the provision of new housing and ability of buyers and renters to find opportunities for housing. So that's added to the first section of the sign code. The second one is regarding political signs. The amendment would embellish the definition of the political sign to provide greater clarity. So you can see the underlined portion is added.
I do have what does greater clarity mean?
Well, let me just say that what it says now, the code says now, is political sign shall be considered as temporary non-commercial sign for the purpose of this article. So it really doesn't define what political means. So that it's clarifying what political means by adding the underlined wording.
Okay.
So it's sort of like when you look up in the definition for political in the dictionary, it says having to do with politics. That's not very clear, right? Because if you don't know what politics are, that's not a good definition. Yeah. So that's what it's doing. It's trying to provide that greater clarity. Okay, then this section adds what's called a substitution clause, and this is the crux of the Supreme Court decision. A statement will be added to the code that non-commercial signs are permitted in the same ways as commercial signs. So this is just a statement that's being added in the code. The fourth change under prohibited signs, this really has to do with the fact that we have some things in the code that are referring to the wrong sections. So we're cleaning up to make sure the section references the correct section. So it doesn't really change the code, it just makes sure the references are correct. And this section under prohibited signs does the same thing. There's some incorrect references. And that is because the sign code has changed over time, but we didn't have a chance to correct all the references. Number 6 through 11 has to do with the list of temporary non-commercial signs. This section of the code establishes standards for political and other types of non-commercial signs. This section has been amended to remove the allowance of non-commercial signs in the public right-of-way. So let me be clear on that. Non-commercial signs in this case means political signs. So what we're recommending, what's been prepared, is removing political signs from being allowed in the public right-of-way. And just to be clear, the code now does allow them. In the past, if you've lived here in West Covina, I think you'll recognize that political signs have been allowed to be placed in the public right-of-way. The existing code allows political and other types of non-commercial signs to be placed in the public right-of-way, and that means between the property line and the street and in tree wells. Based on the Reed decision, if the city were to continue to allow political signs in these locations, all other types of non-commercial signage could also be placed in the same locations. Staff of the City Attorney's Office are recommending that these type of signs not be allowed on public parkways. So the way that the code is structured right now, it allows political signs like 75 days or something before the election. But we have to, you'll see we're removing that, and that is simply because you can't based on content. If you're going to allow non-commercial signs, you have to allow all types of non-commercial signs, and you can't limit them the time because they may not all be about an election that's upcoming.
Does this affect the medians at all?
Well, believe it or not, our code does not allow signs in the medians now.
Well, I know it doesn't do it now.
Okay.
This will not change that.
No, it would not. No, it would not allow sign. The way that the code has been drafted, it would not allow signs in the public right-of-way whatsoever. Not in the medians, not in the parkways, not in city buildings. Wouldn't be allowed anywhere. It had to be on private property. Okay, so we wanted to provide some information on this, what some surrounding cities provided. We did, I communicated with a few cities. I didn't get all the responses back that I'd hoped, but I got a good number. And so this provides you some information on surrounding cities. With Azusa, Baldwin Park, Covina, Duarte, San Dimas, and Walnut. 4 of those cities prohibit signs in the public right-of-way. 2, Duarte and San Dimas, actually have a code right now that's very similar to ours, where they're allowed basically in the parkway areas. I think Duarte's is a little bit more restrictive even. They have a distance from major intersections. But that provides you some information on that. Okay, so this is one change where we're taking out the allowance in the code to allow signs on public property and the parkways. That's in A. And then E is being renumbered, and we're changing some of the standards there. All these changes in this section have to do with the current allowances for political signs in the public right-of-way. That's the same thing here. This is a 75 days before the election. That's being removed. And then 11 is basically just, we're renumbering the segment. I don't want to provide all that. It's basically renumbering from A through F. Okay, 12 is abatement of illegal signs, and this provides some process for how you do that, how a code enforcement officer would go about doing that, and the time frames. And I believe this is all based on what's allowed by law for us to do. And then this is, well, I should talk about this a little bit more because I'm not very clear on this one. So this is in a section called not associated. This is in a sign section where we're allowing banners for commercial uses. So we're in commercial signs now. This is a cleanup issue. It doesn't have specifically to do with Reed. Back in 1998, don't know that any of us in this room were involved in 1998, but for some reason in the code they placed a standard that said that banners were allowed up and through, actually I think it happened in 96, up through June 30th, 1998. So we just want to delete that from the code because whatever the code says, we've been operating in that way. So I don't know what their purpose was at the time, and then I don't know why they didn't address it in 98 or 99 or 2000. And when I came in 2000, this wasn't even on the radar. So we would just delete that segment that basically says that this section expires. The banner section of the code for commercial uses expires after 1998. And then this one has to do with flags, and this has to do with content base. We're regulating content on the flag, so it's being suggested that we remove the specificity on what type of flags would be allowed. And this also has to do with flags in the residential. The previous one was on flags in commercial and industrial zones. This is in residential. It's the same thing. You're removing the specificity, the categories. That goes to the heart of what the Reed decision was about. So the amendments to the code here are proposed generally in response to the Reed decision. The city does have discretion regarding allowing political signs in the public right-of-way, but if allowed, the city cannot restrict the type of signs that would be placed there. So that's the one thing kind of in general we're seeking input from the Planning Commission on direction. Should we keep the language we have in there now, which is basically to prohibit them in the public right-of-way? And then what we have planned this to go to the City Council on February 6th. So our hope is that we can come to a conclusion tonight and get your recommendation to move forward. If not, we'll postpone that meeting and have it as soon as the date possible for City Council. So that concludes my presentation. And I will ask Scott if he wants to provide any discussion points at this point. Okay. Scott's
I'm happy to answer any questions.
So just to be clear, going forward, if this goes through, political signs during the election period would only be on private property. They would not be in the tree wells. They wouldn't be on anywhere else.
That's correct.
And this is going to go to the council?
This is going to the council. And obviously, whatever decision you make, the council has the ability to make a different or the same decision. They have an independent decision-making, autonomous from what your decision-making is.
So if we allow political signs, we could have all the flags and pretty much whatever people want to do for their businesses in the same locations.
Non-commercial signs.
Okay,
So it wouldn't be for businesses, but for other types of things, other activities, other non-profit things where people are, I shouldn't say non-profit, but things where people are trying to make a point about something. They might be ideology.
Yeah, so some examples of non-commercial signs you'd have political signs, vote for person X, vote in this way. You can have ideological signs that says, you need to do X. It's good to, please recycle, or, name your cause, save the whales. That's an ideological sign. Or I hate X group. I hate this type of person. They don't belong in our community. Person Y is bad. All of these are non-commercial signs. So from a legal perspective, it's a lot easier to just make a flat rule that says no signs, period, end of story.
I like that option. I'm going to go for that one, no signs in the public right of way. That's what I like. What do you guys think?
What I might, before you get into it, you might open I think you should ask us any questions you have, but before you have discussion, allow the public to speak, and then after closing the hearing, then you can have that.
Yeah, and if I may, one of the main reasons that most cities opt for no signs in the right of way, it's easier for code enforcement because they don't have to think about it. That's a sign, I'm removing it. It's a sign for come to my yard sale, come, I have a lost puppy, whatever it is. And part of the reason for that is then you're not picking winners and losers. And also, if you have a sign that says, we've got a KKK rally, you don't have to allow that sign to be there. Just in the same way as you treat that sign just like any other sign. It's not allowed.
Fair enough. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, let's open the item to public testimony. Any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Going once, going twice. Okay, let the record reflect no public testimony. Let's close the public hearing, or the public testimony, I should say, and open it up for commission discussion. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll just echo what I just said. I like the idea of code enforcement that's already stretched too thin, not having to worry about details and being able to do their job a little bit more easily. So I like the idea of just not allowing in the public right of way.
Makes
Political
sense.
signs, yeah.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think the best thing to do is keep it simple
Agreed.
and easy to enforce and easy to see if something ain't right, and then you can take care of it. Eliminate the gray area.
Okay. Same here. I don't have a problem with right-of-way signage. Just one thing maybe to point out, Jeff, under recommended changes to item number 13. It's in reference to abatement of illegal signs. The recommended language includes may be removed by the city after giving 24-hour notice. I don't know why. I guess I was stuck on the word giving, as it could be interpreted as providing actually an additional 24 hours of, the sign being there. I may suggest or recommend switching it out to saying providing 24-hour notice to the property owner moving forward. Again, just a recommendation I can live with.
May be removed by the city after providing 24 hours notice?
That's fine.
That's what-
Yeah, just the word giving seems to imply that we're providing an additional 24 hours. At least I could read it under a different set of
And
eyes.
we can discuss that with the city attorney's office to make sure that
Okay.
we good language there.
Okay. That's really it for me as well.
So I think we're ready for action then.
Okay. Do we need a motion, Jeff?
You need a motion. You're going to be approving a resolution. So the resolution number would be 18-5940, and you're going to be acting upon the resolution that's before you that basically as presented, that's what you'd be acting upon. And so we need a motion and a second, and we would want a roll call vote on that.
I'll make
Commissioner
a motion, that's okay, to disallow political signs in the public right of way.
Now, you don't have to do that because it's already, it's drafted that way.
Oh, okay, so I'll
So
make
you can
motion
just make a motion
to
as-
forward
as
this to
presented.
council.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a first and a second. All in favor? Or
I'll
roll
do a
call, Jeff?
yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Castellanos?
Aye.
Commissioner Redholz?
Aye.
Chairman?
It's okay.
Chairman Jimenez, I'll get it out.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. That concludes our public hearing items. Moving on to non-hearing items, we have a study session for Code Amendment 17-02. These are revisions to the downtown plan. Staff, do you have a presentation for us?
I will. Give
Okay.
me one moment. Okay, so this has to do with the downtown plan and code, which is, and this is Code Amendment 1702 to modify the existing downtown plan and code. That plan was adopted by the City Council on in December of 2016. It's a form-based code. I think you guys are all familiar with that. No, it's 2016, actually. It was at the end of the year, a year ago, so it's been 13 months now. So, yeah, it was 2016. It's a form-based code, and other areas in the city have a traditional use-based code. So this is a new thing to the city. We hadn't ever dealt with a form-based code before. The form-based code regulates building form and encourages an urban pedestrian-oriented built form, as opposed to the use-based code, which regulates based on use, not about what the building looks like, but what the use is allowed. At the time of adoption, there was an understanding, at least among staff, that there would be a cleanup necessary after we had used it for a while. And I don't think that's all that unusual. I was just at a seminar on Friday where a state senator was commenting that they were proposing cleanup legislation on something that the state legislature had adopted last year. So it's fairly normal to do that after you've used a tool that's new. The Planning Commission initiated this code amendment on November 28th, 2017. Staff has utilized the code since its adoption, actually even before we were utilizing, because people would call up and we would talk to them about what the code was going to say. We utilized it in the review of 2 development applications that were submitted to us. Staff made notations on issues as they were raised or discovered as we used it in those with the applicants and as we worked with people on the phone and as we just kind of went through the document. So in doing that, staff has compiled 11 issues that need to be addressed in the downtown code. And I prepared a table, as I normally do, that's before you tonight that provides the discussion on the issue and the alternatives and the recommendation that staff has before you. So we're going to go through that chart. I'm going to, again, try to do that at a fairly brisk pace. But this one is a study session. It's not a hearing. We're not leading up to adopting anything tonight. I'm looking for direction. Let me turn to the right page so that I can write down any direction that you give me. I'm looking for direction on where to go from here, and I think I will cover it again before the end, but I don't expect this to be the only study session we have on this document. There's some questions that we're going to ask that I think are multi-layered. We can get through the first layer tonight, but we may need to peel a little bit more off at a future study section. Now, each one of these has a page number. That page number reflects what's in the downtown plan, but I'm not going to cover that necessarily tonight, but I left it up there just for clarity's sake. So, non-conforming uses. The code right now says that expires at 2 years. Code standards expire non-conforming uses after the cease operation for 6 months. So, our municipal code in the rest of the city is 6 months. The downtown plan was designed to prohibit drive-through uses and other auto-centric uses. Ultimately, drive-through uses were included in the downtown plan at the last hearing that we added back in. And a vacant drive-through use is now allowed to open up to 2 years after it ceases operation without a public hearing or the ability to add conditions. In considering uses in the downtown plan, it was decided that the vast majority of uses be allowed, with the exception of auto-centric uses. Auto-centric uses that are not allowed are like auto repair, drive-through ATMs, auto supply, and car washes. We don't really have many of those. There's other auto-centric uses like dealerships. We don't have those in the downtown. It wasn't really much of an issue. But we do have some issues. We do have some uses that originally were not going to be allowed. And so that would create a problem. Staff knew that would create a problem if you had an existing building that was built as a drive-through that can't be now used for anything else and it's just going to sit there and decay over time. We wanted to allow that to be utilized again and give them a 2-year window. But when the council adopted the standards, they allowed drive-through. So that issue that we were addressing no longer is in play. So now the code does allow you to apply for a drive-through use, so it doesn't really matter if they have 2 years, because even if they expire, they can propose a new one and open up again. So option 1 would be make no changes. The expiration continues to be 2 years. Option 2 would be to change the expiration term to 1 year. And then option 3 is to change the expiration term to 6 months, as it is in the remainder of the city. Because there is at least one other auto-centric uses in downtown that we might want to facilitate ability for someone to open if it closed, staff is recommending changing it to 1 year. There may be some other things that it just makes it, because we're trying to change the uses, not the uses, the built form down there. It might make sense to allow the 1 year as opposed to 6 months. So that's staff's suggestion. And I'll pause, there's comments, and go on if there's not any.
No comments? I think we're good, Jeff.
Okay. Item number 2 has to do with outdoor dining. I'm going to cover this quickly. One page says it's an administrative review, and another page says it's a minor modification. Administrative review is a staff level review with no notification. A minor modification is like a planning director's modification. The administrative review allows for revocation. Minor modification does not. So options require the approval of an administrative review. Option 2 require the approval of a minor modification. We're suggesting option 1 require the approval of an administrative review. This process is less costly to the applicant and can be revoked if there are issues. So it's simple, staff-driven, doesn't require notification, but it does allow for revocation if we have issues. So we think that makes more sense than the other.
Any comments?
Okay, the third one, allow increased hospital building height. The downtown plan limits the height of buildings in the general urban zone to 40 feet and 3 stories in height. Staff was working with West Covina Medical Group on a potential hospital building. They had submitted, they have since withdrawn. But they did inform, the architect did inform staff that hospital buildings need additional ceiling height over what other uses might need. So what office or retail might need. And a hospital, and you can understand that if you've ever been in a medical building and seen all this stuff that has to run through the building. They recommended, the architect recommended allowing up to 58 feet for a 3-story building for hospital buildings in the general urban zone. All new buildings in the general urban zone are limited to 35 feet in height within 100 feet of single-family properties. To encourage hospitals, it would be appropriate to modify the standards to allow for the use without the need to apply for a variance. So as we were talking with them, they were thinking to apply for a variance, although I don't think they thought that was a very good option, but they felt like they didn't have any other good options. So option 1 would be to make no changes. The maximum height would continue to be 40 feet. Option 2 would be to change the allowed height to allow flexibility, but retain the 3-story height limit for hospital buildings. And we're recommending option 2, change the allowed height to 58 feet and 3 stories for hospitals only in the general urban zone.
Any comments? Just one for me, Jeff. The "and" implies that it has to be 58 feet and 3 stories. It could be interpreted that they can't do a 2-story at 58, right?
Yeah, it could be interpreted that way. It should be.
And I think the idea is not to lock them in to 58 and do 3 stories, I should say. Okay.
And I don't think the code is written that way. I think it's number of stories and in parentheses is the number of, there's a number of feet in there. We'll check that, make sure it's not written that way.
Okay, just at face value, right? It implies that it has to be 3 stories.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Okay. 4, building height when adjacent to single-family properties. The downtown area previously included a variety of zoning designations adjacent to residential uses, including office, professional, regional, commercial, service commercial, and medium commercial. The previous zoning includes restrictions on the heights of buildings from 25 to 45. So depending on where you were and what if you had a single-family house adjacent, it depended on what the zoning was, what was allowed. Some places it was 25, some places it was up to 45. The downtown plan places a restriction on the heights of 35 feet within 100 feet of single-family residential properties. And just to remind, single-family properties are limited to 25 feet in height. In the general urban zone, which is the zone adjacent to single-family houses, the height limit is 3 stories and 40 feet. So we have 5 options. 1, make no changes, leave it as it is. Option 2, change the allowed height within 100 feet of single-family developed properties to 25 feet. Option 3, change the allowed height within 100 feet of single-family developed properties to 30 feet. Option 4, change the allowed height within 50 feet of single-family developed properties to 25 and within 100 feet to 35. That's a step, so it allows for a step up to the 40-foot. And option 5, change the allowed height within 50 feet of single-family developed properties to 25 feet. In considering that, staff is recommending option 4, change the allowed height within 50 feet of single-family developed properties to 25 and within 100 feet to 35. This reduces the heights in close proximity to single-family, at least makes them equal to what they'd be allowed to have, but allows the flexibility to step up to 40 feet as the buildings progress away from the single-family houses. And if you build a 2-story, you know, within 50 feet, and you build a 3-story, then next to it, you're going to block the visibility of the 3-story by the 2-story. So I think there's some method to that madness to allow that. So that's kind of our thought, at least at this point, on that.
Any questions? None? Jeff, is the measurement to the property line or
Correct.
the structure?
It's the property line.
Okay. No additional questions?
So I'll move on. Number 5, allowed building types, consistency with the chart on page 53. So the downtown plan is a form-based code which establishes the type of building allowed in a given zone. The allowed building types are indicated in 3 locations in the code. 3 different sort of sections or chapters in the code list them. After utilizing the downtown code, it was noted that there is some inconsistency as to the lists, those 3 lists. So the next ones I'm going to do is, I think, an A and a B on 5 here that cover those things. And without going into too great a detail, the list under discussion shows what the code says in the 3 different locations. Option 1 would be to allow all building types that are included in the list, all 5 building types, I think. And you'll see there's 4, but there's 5 total if you count. Option 2 is to allow court, hybrid, liner, and flex buildings to match the chart on page 53. We're suggesting option 1. Given the newness of the code, staff recommends that the revisions allow for the greatest flexibility possible. And we didn't find any issue with allowing all those types of uses in that zone. It seems like it works fine.
And isn't that really the purpose of a form-based code, is to kind of have more flexibility and allow?
Well, it's not specifically the purpose, but I think
part of it.
For our purposes, I think it makes a lot of sense. There may be cases sometimes when you don't want to allow flexibility because you want to have a certain type of use there. For instance, along Glendora shops, you may not want to have as much flexibility, and we don't have as much flexibility because you want shop fronts. But in a general sense, I agree with you. Okay, so 5B has to do with other building types, and you'll see the list there. They're kind of broken up a little bit. Option 1, allow all building types that are included in the list, and I won't go through the whole list. Option 2, allow just the ones that are specific. Again, same idea. We want to allow the greatest flexibility, so we're suggesting option 1. If it's in any one of the 3 lists, we'd allow it in all. So we'd modify all the lists so that they would have all of them that were allowed in any one of the lists. That's a bit confusing and trying to move quickly, but hopefully that's understandable.
Okay. No questions? None?
Okay, number 6 has to do with the parking requirement reduction and when that's applicable. So the downtown code allows for reduced parking of 0.65 parking spaces for each space required by the municipal code. Sounds a little confusing. If the municipal code requires then 100 spaces, then a development in the downtown area would require 65 spaces. The concept is that urban development allows for walking to several different properties so that you would park once and then walk to various destinations, which is the same reasoning we use for shopping centers all over the town in the rest of the municipal code, including the mall. While the downtown code states that non-residential uses require 0.65 parking spaces, it is not clear if that is for development that complies with the downtown plan or for all development of the downtown area, which is a big distinction. And so option 1 would be to allow 0.65 parking requirement for all properties within the downtown area, effectively changing their parking requirement, reducing everyone in the downtown area's parking requirement by 35%. Option 2 is allow .65 parking for a new development that is in compliance and utilizes the downtown plan. Staff's recommending that the concept for a lower parking requirement is based on urban development. Most of the existing developed parcels in downtown are developed in a suburban model, and allowing reduced parking just across the board could lead to merchant-related issues and not enough parking for the uses that are there. So that's our thought, that we should clarify that if you're submitting a plan that's proposing to develop under the downtown plan, that you can propose that plan to meet the .65, that'd be your minimum. But the existing uses that are out there, especially those ones that have seas of parking lots, those should be at .65. I mean, those should be at 100%, not use at .65.
Just one question on what about a change of use? Would they be required to comply with the .65 or?
So if it was changed in an existing building in one of the shopping centers we have, they would still be under the existing zoning standard.
So the idea is truly new development, new ground-up construction?
Right.
Okay.
And the idea is that it's going to be built in a different form. So the Colony, which was built basically in the form that we're looking for, higher density, but in the same form, you know, is going to have a different parking relationship with the other uses than a layout like the not Best Buy, the Toys R Us parking lot, where it's basically a strip center, and it doesn't really lend or allow you to park there and then walk to the movie theater and then across to a restaurant and then come back. They want you to use that site. So that's the difference.
Okay. I see no additional questions.
Okay. 7, add standards for pedestrian-oriented signs. Without reading through this, we kind of looked, we considered that at the beginning when the code was provided to us by our consultant before it came to the study sessions. We were considering changing the sign standards in the downtown area, but as we came into it, so we got close to that, we thought that's going to be confusing for everyone, that one person across one side of the street allows one type of sign, but on the other side of the street they allow a different type of sign. And it would be confusing for staff and for the sign contractors and for the developers. So we didn't do that. We left the sign standards alone. And so when we came back, we looked, and is there any type of sign that we think makes sense to allow in the downtown that isn't specifically allowed in other places? And the one type of sign that we see is the blade sign. Blade signs project from the building face, kind of like a projecting sign, and extend above the roof line. While the code allows for projecting and roof signs, it would allow for easier processing if the code specifically included standards for blade signs. Because blade signs are ideal for pedestrian scale urban divide, so it's sticking out, so when you're walking down the street, you can see it in front of you, as opposed to a wall sign that you can't see unless you're looking directly at the building, which are really meant for viewing it from an automobile. They are not necessarily important to be included for signs in suburban portions of the city. So option 1 is make no changes to the type of sign allowed. And then option 2 is to allow blade signs in the downtown area. I'll make one other comment. We have 2 blade signs in the downtown area. One of them is on the theater building, and one of them is on the building next to it where Lemon Indian food is. And I apologize, I can't remember the other uses in there. Crab? Is there a crab? Crab restaurant? Whatever the crab restaurant is there.
It's a garlic crab.
Garlic crab, okay, thank you very much. That has a smaller blade sign on it. So those are the only 2 in town that I'm aware of, both of them in the downtown, both of them built or installed for the same purposes we're talking about here, because they're meant for people to view them as they're walking towards them. So we're suggesting that, or recommending that we allow blades in the downtown area, and we come up with some standards, and we put that in the downtown plan as opposed to the municipal code.
Any questions? Okay, none at the moment.
Okay, number 8, add the minor modification permit. As part of the entitlement processing code amendment, which you may remember, you had some study sessions on it, we're still developing the language, and hopefully we'll be bringing that to you as early as the next Planning Commission meeting. The recommendation will be to eliminate the planning director's modification process and replace that with minor site plan review and minor modification. At the time the downtown plan was adopted, the minor site plan review was added to the list of applications, but minor modifications was not. So this is a chicken or egg thing, which is supposed to happen first, but we're kind of doing them in harmony. And actually, the entitlement should be done before this code amendment is done. But option 1, make no changes. Option 2, add minor modifications to the applications chart, and we're recommending that option 2.
Don't see any questions.
Okay.
None.
We'll move on. Special exception. So a new discretionary application was created in the downtown plan called the special exception. The special exception application allows developers to request an exception from building placement, lot size, and so on, that for projects that provide special amenities, design, or aesthetic benefits to the community. The Planning Commission has the authority to approve this special exception. The downtown plan includes the process, but it does not state a special exception requires a notification or a public hearing. So option 1, make no changes. Option 2, revise the downtown plan to include requirement for notification in the same manner as the precise plan. We're recommending option 2 to revise the downtown plan. While it's likely that any special exception is going to be accompanied by a precise plan which requires notification, I think it's just going to be simpler if we have it in there to reduce any problems or confusion in the future if somehow something came about that didn't need a precise plan and they were proposing a special exception. So option 2 is our recommendation.
Makes sense.
Okay. Number 10, I think we just have one more after this, so we're doing good. List of permitted uses. So the downtown plan includes a list of permitted uses that establishes allowed uses and uses that require a discretionary review process. You guys are all familiar with that. And we did talk about some of these same uses at the time when we were doing the study sessions about a year and a half ago. Over the past year, there have been requests for the types of businesses that are not included in the list of uses allowed. Some of these uses were discussed as potential uses prior to the adoption of the downtown code and not included in it. So uses to be considered that have been brought up, and we've had discussions with our city manager and community and economic development divisions, retail and cigar lounges. So that's a place you can buy cigars and or smoke them. Hookah lounge as an accessory use. Bars or taverns. So that would be a place where on-sale alcohol is allowed, but food is not required. And then incubator use, which we haven't really had anybody request that, and it's sort of in there as the R&D, but we thought it might be, we've heard of these and we know there's a few that exist. An incubator use is a business startup or operation that is a shared use. And I don't recall if all of you guys were at the general plan. Remember we had people that came in and spoke to speaker series? The last one was a gentleman from Long Beach, and he had an incubator thing where basically they had a kitchen facility that businesses could come in and use that kitchen facility. Small startup business could come use that kitchen facility, and they might use it for a year or two and then get a place, and then another one would come in. So that's what an incubator use is. It's a shared space. And the things that we think, we probably want to be limiting on somewhat limiting. We want to be open and flexible, but we don't really want to end up with manufacturing uses or uses with odors and other problems. So right now we're thinking that the 3 uses that should make sense would be kitchen, and we're really reaching out here for the 3D printing, but I think that's coming, and I don't know who's going to get that. But 3D printing, if somebody had a 3D printer, I was just watching something on medical uses where they were 3D printing aorta valves. And so these things are happening. I don't know that it'll ever come to West Covina, but it seems like that would be, if someone was having the expense to purchase one of those, then it would be a shared use. And then the other one, which is I think fairly obvious and probably allowed with our code right now, is office. But those are the 4 types of uses that we talked about, and I don't really have a recommendation here. So this is kind of a discussion. You might want to just go, and maybe the thing right now is to look at this. We can come back to it after you've heard from the public. But those 4 uses are the uses that think there might be some desire well, there is some desire, especially on the first 3, we get requests for those types of uses. And let me be clear on the tavern. It's not necessarily just a simple tavern or bar that somebody's trying to open, but it's a use that doesn't, it's got alcohol, but it doesn't include a restaurant. So we do get those kind of types of uses. And if you think about things that are in Pasadena, or I think sometimes in South Pass or Alhambra, you might recognize some of the types of uses that we might be getting requests for. So we will come back to number 10 after we've heard from the public. Any questions on that, though?
I'm going to have a few questions related to 10. Should I just wait until after
No, I think the
public?
questions, let's have the questions now, and then we can have the discussion on what you think we should do.
So just in terms of because we specifically call out cigar lounges and hookah lounge. What if someone wants to come in and do a vape shop lounge? I guess where I'm going with this, should we just have an all-encompassing definition for smoke lounge or something along those lines? I guess with the vaping nowadays, I believe the state has ruled that it's quote-unquote considered like smoking or should be treated as such. But I guess the idea would be, what if someone wanted to come in? These two seem very specific. And if someone wanted to come in and do a vape lounge, would that apply just because everyone seems to be vaping nowadays?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think that this list has been generated by the uses that have been requested. So for whatever reason, nobody's requested a vape lounge. But I agree with what you're saying. Those, including that with the first two, if that's something the Planning Commission would think would be appropriate to recommend, then you could put those in one category.
I mean, they're very specific right now, but
They're
just
specific because those are
the ones that
getting
you're
those specific
requesting.
requests. Yeah.
But in the future, maybe hookah may actually go away. Vaping may replace the hookah. I believe it's almost, I don't want to say they're directly related. I've not done either, but the idea is it almost seems that one can replace the other in the near future, right?
Well, they're very similar, but what I would say about the hookah is there's a cultural affinity to hookah. So I'm not sure it's going to go away because those cultures, they come from those cultures.
Or the cigar lounge could go away.
Cigar lounge and
yeah.
vaping might go away. But,
Yeah, agreed.
So you're right. They do. All those type of uses kind of fluctuate.
Right.
From year to year.
I guess my idea would be to recommend a land use classification that assists the staff in defining all of them as all-encompassing versus being very specific. I guess that would be my thought. When we talk about bars, would that include a microbrewery as well, maybe? Is the idea to cover the microbrewery?
I can't tell you specifically what, but it does that kind of thing that have been requested. A microbrewery.
Right.
I think we included that in the downtown. It is in there.
Okay.
But it's that kind of, usually the microbrewery, I think what's in there would have food. So this could be a microbrewery or something like a tasting room where you might have retail sales and then want to have on sale ABC service, which isn't allowed by the code except for, so it is that's the request we're getting, yes.
Fair enough. That's it for me.
I'll add on to that. I have the same thoughts you had. Maybe considering an all-encompassing. Back when we voted to, or recommended to disallow these uses, hookah, cigar lounges, I kind of knew that we would be requested at this. I knew this would come back to us, so I think we should, consider what Chairman Jimenez hesitated is recommending. Yeah, because even if vaping hasn't been requested, I think it may be requested, and I think you covered appropriately about the taverns versus tasting rooms, because that might be tricky as far as, someone saying, well, it's not a tavern, it's a tasting room.
Yeah, they're hard to define, and I believe Ron can back me up on this, I think, but the ABC license you get is the same.
Okay, then that makes it a little easier.
There's no distinction, between if you have on-sale alcohol without restaurant, that's a business license, or I'm sorry, that's an ABC license. It doesn't matter if it's just what you think of as a traditional bar, or if it's a microbrewery, or something along those lines. It's still that same ABC license.
Okay, yeah, that's good that we're bringing it up. I didn't know that part because of another one I had seen, and I thought that there was a distinction. So
yeah, a lot of times there's a distinction in what the owner wants to do, but I don't think the ABC.
Got
so
it.
if you think about that in that way, historically, the city of West Covina has kind of relied on ABC to back us up with the uses that we have. Because if someone has a restaurant and then they start abusing that privilege by not serving food and creating a nightclub or something, a tavern, then ABC can go after them, as well as the city can try to gain. Without that, you know, if the city could have a CUP that allows a certain range of activities. ABC might not back you up on that, but the city still has code enforcement authority over those things, and still would have the ability to revoke if there was a CUP attached. That's the further discussion. If we decide to allow this, then we need to come back and we need to talk about if it should be a CUP, if it should be an AUP, if it should be allowed by right. You know, what exactly? And the one thing different with the hookah is everything that we've ever had requested. Ron, correct me on this if I'm wrong. Every hookah we've ever had requested is an accessory use. It's not as a primary use. So that's one difference between hookah and cigar lounge or vaping, because those are the primary uses. And I don't know that we would want to allow, that we would have the ability to not allow hookah except for under, as an accessory use, as we would the other uses as well.
Okay, good, that's all for right now.
Commissioner Redholz?
Just for clarity, the ones we're talking about here, if we were to permit them, they would still require discretionary review, each and every one.
We need to have a further discussion about that. So we would have another study session where we come back and we would have the discussion. Once we have direction from you which ones you think we'd want to consider, we bring that back at a second study session to talk about what the discretionary use would be. Or if it's a discretionary use, or what the process would be.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's it for right now.
So we'll come back to that one. And this is number 11, parking requirement for Glendora shops. And save this one for last because it's the most thorny question we need to, and we didn't really, this wasn't vetted out. We didn't really, you know, in the process of focusing on the general plan, the downtown plan, we didn't really vet the issue out there. But this is a big issue. If we don't fix this issue, then you're not going to have everyone to develop in the Glendora shops area. Parking for Glendora shops is provided in a city-owned parking lot with limited parking adjacent to the alley to the east. So what that means is that the Glendora shops, they only provide parking behind. Everything else is on a city-owned parking lot. The lots along that corridor are minimal and do not allow for parking structures due to the size and depth. So no matter what those guys do, they can't build a parking structure. They just don't have the size. Lots range from a small size of 2760 to the largest, which is 18,000 square feet, which is not very big. That's half an acre is, about 22,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. So this is less than half an acre is the largest lot that's out there. It would be unlikely that the lots could supply the parking required in the case of new development. So as part of the Glendora redesign project, the consultant completed a parking study for Glendora Avenue in 2016. The study indicates that there are 997 parking spaces in the Glendora Avenue area, including in the structures and the parking field up against the freeway. Actual parking counts that were taken, I think it was 3 or 4 different days, indicated that 25 to 26% of the space, 25 to 36% of the spaces were utilized. So if you do the math backwards, then 70 to 80% of the parking spaces were available every time they were out there looking at the parking supply. While there's adequate parking to meet demand currently, successful uses could increase the parking demand, so it will be important for the city to monitor parking in the area and to adjust parking requirements or supply accordingly. So in other words, we need to watch that as we go forward. I hope no one gets confused. This is not about the Glendora redesign. We're not talking about the Glendora redesign. This doesn't matter if the Glendora redesign goes forward or doesn't go forward. The issue is still the same issue. So option 1, so just to further clarify the issue is if someone comes in and wants to tear down a building on Glendora Shops and build a new building, which allows up to 3 stories in height. So let's say they have a 1-story building, they want to build a 3-story building, they cannot possibly provide the parking required, and then they'd have to propose a variance, and that we don't want people in that circumstance where they can't build anything without a variance. That doesn't make sense. It's not good for the city. We want to figure out a way that doesn't require people to propose a variance just to develop their property with new development, because I think it's the city wants to encourage new development where allowed. Option 1, only require parking for floors above the first story. So we're talking about new development. So if a new development came in, option 1 would say, the first story is a gimme, no parking required for that, but second and third floors would require parking. Option 2, only require parking for the floor above the second floor. So that's saying that the first 2 floors don't count, and only the third floor parking is required. Option 3, require no parking for existing floor area, parking required for floor area greater than existing. So that locks in whatever square footage there has been. There really hasn't been any additions in that area except for the one building closest to Carl's Jr. That's the only building that's been built in the last 50 years, I think. So the rest of them, you look up the square footage, they're allowed that square footage, and if they have 1,500 square feet and they build a 3,000 square foot building, they'd be responsible for providing parking for the 1,500 square feet that's added, not the existing. Option 4, only require parking for residential uses. Commercial use would not require parking. So then if someone came in and proposed, so keep in mind that the code right now says that that has to be shop front retail. So the ground floor of Glendora Avenue has to have retail on the ground floor. That was a circle in it. But the upper 2 floors, there's an option. They could provide those retail. Retail's unlikely there, but office or some other form of commercial. And then on the second and third floor, they could put office on the second and residential on the third. They could put residential on the second and third. This is saying that whatever situation, if you built a 3-story commercial building, you wouldn't have to provide parking. But if you built a 1-story commercial and 2-story residential, you'd have to provide parking for residential. Option 5 is require no parking. I believe, well, I did have that statement. I took it out of the presentation because it was just too long. But my recommendation would be no matter what you do, whatever we decide to do here, residential must require parking. Because you need the residential to provide its own parking for market reasons and for the uses staying valid over time. Because I think you can understand what might happen if you don't have parking and then you have a parking problem and now people are having to park a long ways away. We already have enough street parking issues in the city. We don't want to develop any more. So residential needs to provide its own parking. That's the one caveat here. Whatever we do with commercial, residential is going to have to, in my recommendation, residential is going to have to provide its own. All right, so those are the options that we thought of so far. Option 3 is what we're recommending. While options 2 and 4 have merit, we think all these have some merit. We're recommending option 3 as it looks in the commercial square foot. It focuses on the commercial square footage. Successful restaurants or other types of destination business could increase the parking demand while not increasing the floor area. It is also important to clarify parking demand for a variety of uses and what happens if a use with more intense parking requirement wants to open. So I'm getting to the next step. But the issue is that the recommendation is that we're suggesting option 3, which would not require parking to be provided for existing floor area, only for additional floor area, and always for residential uses.
Or net new square footage plus residential.
Yes, exactly. If you want to talk, you want to be clear, then that's how you'd say it, yes. Okay. So if there's no questions on that, I would suggest that we go and allow the public to speak, and then we can go back maybe quickly over. I think most of these things, I think it's probably a pretty simple decision, but these last couple, I think, are the thorny ones. Before we do open the public hearing, I want to point out that we did get an email from Robert Torres, and that's on the dais in front of you, and he has some suggestions. His mostly have to do with the separation of single family from the commercial uses there. We can talk about those things too after we hear from the public.
Okay, we'll listen to public testimony. Anyone interested in speaking on this particular item, please make sure to fill out a card. We have them here at the podium. We do have a card from Jim Grivich regarding this item. Feel free to come to the podium. Thank you.
Discussions that gone on with the city council. I've been speaking in opposition to the Glendora project. I know these revisions aren't directly involving that, but they are indirectly involving that, mainly because of this, what's in this document as the parking study. It says the current lots aren't used very much, and that's true. They're not used very much. But the use has been increasing because they have had a couple of restaurants come in that have been doing rather well in the last few months. So it looks like the use is coming up. And my point is that there is a plan to significantly reduce the amount of parking on that street. And I and some other folks apparently have had some influence on the city council, and now they're hesitating to implement the plan. Part of the reason is because of the reduced parking. There is a real problem with reducing parking, and it's actually a problem that goes back to the general plan. The general plan says that we want to have an urban city as opposed to a suburban city, at least in the downtown, and that implies reduced parking. Well, the real issue is if you don't have a convenient place for people to park, they will choose to go somewhere else. And I'm going to use as my primary example is the Lakes development and the attempt to put in retail restaurants there, most of which have struggled and failed since it started. There is no convenient parking there, and at least in my personal choices, that's why I decided I went there once and didn't go back, because the parking's not convenient. All the other restaurants you can go to, the parking is convenient. You know, especially when you're a little older and walking isn't so easy anymore, that becomes a significant issue. I actually think that's material in why that area hasn't done well. Glendora Avenue has a chance to come back. There is, as I said, a couple of recent successes that have gone in there that have started to generate some business. And I'm going to use as my example a place in Covina called Shoppers Lane. Shoppers Lane was, I would consider, an absolute failure as a commercial area about 10 years ago. And what happened is basically 3 new restaurants came into Shoppers Lane. A place called Don Leche, a place called Old World Deli, and another place called House of Benny. All of those have generated a lot of business, and where they had actually they had the exact same parking setup as Glendora Avenue has now, 3 rows of parking. It used to be empty, and now it is full. On almost every Saturday night, you have a hard time finding a parking place there. And why? Because those restaurants are not just full, but they're overfilled. They're very popular. People go there, and it's a very successful shopping center. And I'm saying Glendora Avenue has a chance to go there. There's an evolution going on in shopping. People aren't doing retail as much, retail shopping. They are going towards food courts. For big shopping centers are turning over to food courts. Retail shopping is now done by Amazon or the equivalent. And so food courts and all of that needs lots of parking. So I'm trying to say that the whole idea of the downtown urban thing not needing parking, I think is not a good idea. And further direction, anything that would be reducing parking is not a good idea. The aspects of this that would reduce the amount of parking is not a good idea. The parking study in here, I think, is all that's doing is documenting a failed commercial district. If you have a successful commercial district, you have a full parking lot, and these numbers wouldn't be true. So I wouldn't use this as a basis for any kind of decision making on whether you need parking or not. You want success. You guarantee failure if you don't have any place for people to park. So I hope I'm not I'm trying to set an environment on why the Glendora Avenue project is having trouble now and why the general plan is in trouble now, and it's because of this parking issue. It may be the most important part of the whole thing. I know there's ideology involved. There's folk that says we got to get people out of their cars and walking, and that's all philosophy and it's all nice. But the fact is that people will make rational decisions on where they're going to spend their money. They want it to be convenient, they want it to be quality, etc. And they won't do it for ideological reasons. They'll do it what makes sense to them. And I think we should do our planning, our city planning, based on what people choose to do on a rational basis, not any ideology. Thank you.
Mr. Grivich, I have a question for you. You cited Chopper's Lane. Did they increase the parking over there at all?
No. No, it
So
used to be an empty parking lot. Now it's full.
Yeah, now it's full, but with the same parking.
Same
They
parking.
just brought in restaurants that people want to go to.
That's correct. It
Unlike
was the
what we
same
had.
kind of parking as in Glendora Avenue right now, 3 rows of parking.
Same number of spaces.
Well, I don't know about the same number
Basically.
of spaces. It's the same basic setup. I didn't count the spaces.
Okay.
And they only have 4 successful restaurants, and it filled the whole place up.
That's all, 4, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
While I'm filling this out. Okay. My name is Edward Salee. My wife and I own a piece of property on Glendora Avenue, 142 South Glendora. I myself have been in business here in West Covina since 1962. And I've been mostly up and down Glendora Avenue, and I've seen it come and go. But, you know, the parking part out front, like as our building is small, probably one of the smallest ones up there. But anyway, it's there are only 4 parking places in front of it. 2 of those are handicapped. In back, we have 4 parking slots. 2 of them are a dumpster holder and the dumpster. So if you're restricting parking, you're going to force our customers to park over out by the freeway and Never Never Land. And I think you can tell by looking at me, I'm not 20, and my customers aren't either. So I'm concerned about losing parking. We also have had another problem behind where some of the people that live, I don't know, in the apartments or wherever they live, park cars and leave them. They're not even licensed in some cases. And I have sort of a running battle with the city as to who owns what. And I own it when there's something to be done. They own it when I want to do something. But it just kind of works out that way. But it's mainly the back of the building. And what brought me here tonight actually was I received one of those code enforcement tickets in the mail because somebody came along and dumped 2 TVs and 2 mattresses and leaned them up against our dumpster holder out back. And so I get a notice that I better get rid of them or I'm in deep trouble. Well, they aren't mine. And the city actually has on occasion come into that area and remove things. But when somebody dumps stuff, they take up a parking slot. And all I'm trying to tell you is that we need whatever parking is there. And so far, I haven't seen anything that was going to help us. So anyway, thank you. I just wanted to spout off a little and I'll fill this out.
Sir, is yours the pawn shop, or what is your business?
Mine's an accounting office.
The accounting office, okay.
Yeah, we do tax work, income tax.
So you're busy right now, probably.
Kinda. But anyway, it's, and I've had locations from One of them was downstairs or upstairs in Dr. Kennett's building before he owned it. I had a couple offices up there. We were at 207 South Glendora when I first started, which is now a cake shop. And then I owned the Greyhound Bus Depot here for 20 years. So, and had this accounting office also. I've sort of been around quite a bit. I just am not political. Sorry, I don't know any of you.
So are you familiar at all with the plan is for that street? What was,
Only
discussed?
scuttlebutt, which probably isn't anything. Well, let's see, somebody told me they were gonna close Glendora Avenue and run it through my parking lot out front. And that may be true, may not be, I don't know. Until something happens, I'm not gonna really worry about it, I guess. But I am concerned about the parking. One thing that might help out back there, and I talked to the lady that gave me my nifty little yellow card, and she said that she kind of agreed also, was that if we had no overnight parking out behind the building there, it's very possible we could clean up some of this stuff. But other than that, as you can tell, I didn't prepare anything that was very literate, shall we say, but I'm trying to hold on to my business that I've had here for 55 years. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll fill this out.
Please, feel free to give it to staff. Anyone else here to speak on this item? Okay, let the record reflect there are no additional comments. We will close it up for redirect. Jeff?
Well, maybe I reiterate, this has nothing to do with any plans that the city might or might not have to redesign Glendora. This is a zoning tool. We're not, the Planning Commission doesn't have control over closing down or opening up public parking. The Planning Commission doesn't have authority over public right-of-ways. So that's not what's under discussion here tonight. This is purely about the zoning for that area and what, if somebody was going to redevelop something, what would be allowed there and what would the requirements would be. So I don't think we need to talk about 1 through 9 here. I think most of that, I seem to understand that the commission that's here tonight was okay with those changes as recommended. And if I'm seeing some nodding, so I'm going to just go to number 10. If I can figure out how to use this backwards. Number 10 was the uses, and so the question I think is if the commission would like to consider those uses, any of the uses or all of the uses, any individual uses or all the uses, we can come back with another study session to discuss the discretionary nature of them, whether they would be allowed by right, discretionary, accessory use, that kind of thing. So I'd be looking for some direction from the commission on that.
Jeff, was staff's initial direction, or thought I should say, to maybe allow these by right?
We haven't really thought it through. To tell you the truth, staff, we just had discussion on most of these uses a year and a half ago, and it was decided to leave them out, and the council went with that recommendation and left them out. So so right now we're just looking, are you interested in them being in the code, and then we'll come back, we'll flush those, the discretionary opportunities, the options that are available, and then we'll provide a recommendation. We haven't really thought that through at all.
Okay, any thoughts, Commissioner Reynolds?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm fine with adding them, as in consideration, sure.
Okay.
I don't see any problem with that. It might be too early to decide whether it's, allowed by right or not. But I do think we should definitely have the discussion and go forward and take a look at it. I noticed no one from the public had anything to say about this tonight anyway.
Right.
But, that might change in the future.
I agree. That's, like I said earlier, I think we're going to continue to get requests about this, and we should discuss it again.
Okay.
I would say the same thing. These are unique uses. I mean, my initial gut reaction is to say, they should be subject to some additional staff review. Not necessarily saying conditional use permit, administrative permit, but I guess if they involve any alcohol sales or something unique in that sense, maybe they do merit some level of discretionary review. Just a thought.
Okay. We will, and obviously we have two members of the commission who are not here tonight too, so they aren't able to. Next study session, hopefully they'll be here and they can voice their ideas on that process. But we'll provide that. We'll bring these back with possible possible use processes, and then we can have that discussion at that time. Number 11, which is the parking for when or if Glendora Avenue buildings are demolished and something wants to be built there, what kind of parking requirement should occur? Just to remind you, we were recommending option 3, which is require no parking for existing floor area. Parking would only be required for a floor area greater than existing, and would always be required for residential.
I agree with the staff recommendation. I like option 3.
Okay.
It places the burden, I think, really on the developer, right, to any net new square footage, they would have to provide the parking. To a certain degree, maybe there is an incentive to leave the property alone, obviously, that we don't have to provide the necessary parking. That's maybe a different way to look at it, I would think. So I'm okay with staff's recommendation.
No, and I think you're right. That is part of it, and that's a question maybe as we go through time whether that's really what the city wants to do. But there's some other options that we probably need some assistance on, like an in lieu parking fee that would go into a parking district that the city could then start saving money up to assist or be partner with someone to develop another parking structure. But I think you really need some help with an economic specialist to figure out what the price of that is. I don't think we'd want to just come up with something we pulled out of the air for that. But I think you make a good point. If your existing parking is taken care of, one-story buildings may not be as easy to redevelop as a two-story building then.
I mean, I think that's one way to look at it if we're trying to protect a lot of the unique businesses that are there today.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we will go with option number 3. So I think that's all we need to have discussion on this item, unless there's anything else that the commission wants to go over.
Just one question, not very brief, back to number 10. So has there been interest in 3D printing businesses?
No, we haven't had any, besides me watching it on TV.
But it's a good, I mean, it's neat, like you said, printing an aortic valve, and I mean, hopefully we do get something like that. There's a ton of uses.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read about very specialized aerospace parts that can't be made in traditional ways. So
right.
I'm sure it's endless. So that'd be cool. I think we should consider it, and hopefully we get something cool like that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, that's all.
When I come back with the next study session, I'll probably reiterate what we did here tonight, just so that it's mainly for your benefit, but also for the benefit of the commissioners who are not here, just so they know what was covered. And then we will move forward. This one I'm trying to move as quick as possible. We're not in any great big rush, but it would be nice to have this done before the middle of the year. So I would hope to have a study session in February or March if I can get everything together, what we need to do to bring back. And there may be some other discussion items that we bring back at that time as well. But I appreciate the commission's input on that. Is that item number 2? Completely out of order, but since the meeting is still going on, we do have the applicant here for item number 2, the consent calendar. If you'd wish to reconsider that, open that back up. I'm not sure, Scott may want to provide the necessary
Yeah, if
process.
we're going to do that, I will note that that we didn't have anybody previously. You're not required to, but if you would like to hear from that, I would request a motion for reconsideration of that item. You had previously continued it. I would request a motion for reconsideration on that action.
I'll make a motion. Were you going to say something first?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify, though. Are we doing this at the conclusion of our non-hearing items, or the idea would be to take that item next?
That's up to you.
You could take it now if you want to.
Any
Or you can wait.
thoughts? Okay, fair enough.
I'll make a motion to reconsider item number 2.
I'll second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Do you need a vote?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're going to do right now for members of the public, we're going to jump back on our agenda here to item number 2 under consent calendar. This is an extension of time for precise plan 14-01, conditional use permit 1405 at 1030 East Merced Avenue. The applicant is West Covina Montessori Academy. Do we need a staff presentation, Jeff, or do
I
we
don't
just
know that we
go-
need a staff presentation because you guys, you're the ones that are making the decision. The applicant wasn't here to hear, but they know what they're proposing. So I think it's just a question to bring them up and ask any questions that you might have of them.
Fair enough. I will invite the applicant, their team, just to maybe answer a few questions regarding the request for extension. Good evening. Name and address for the record, please.
The project at 1030 East Merced. Inayat Firdausi, I'm the president of the academy.
Thank you. I think we have a few questions from our commissioners here. Who would like to go first? Commissioner Redholz?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming up. When you originally, were in front of us and proposing the modular building, I believe you stated that the school was growing and needing the room and all that space. So do you still need that room?
Yes, we still do, but this is primarily to serve the students that are sponsored essentially by California Department of Education. We have some funding from them. So we have two things going on. One is that we have additional funding that's coming up, which hasn't been yet approved, so that we could take more kids and the state would pay for them. This is primarily for families that are essentially low-income families that need services in terms of the Montessori education and all care. The reason we have not started the project also is because we've done some work, but we haven't started the modular building project yet because of the fact that we have some funding issues with that.
So the funding you're receiving is for the students. It's
Right.
not a construction.
No, we also have a construction, essentially a loan from the state for that purpose.
For that purpose.
Yes.
You have that
To
now?
expand capacity.
You
We have
already,
approval of the part of the funding, but we need more because it's not coming up to be enough to.
okay, so when you applied originally for this, did you already have funding in place for it, or did you need to go acquire funding?
Yeah, we needed to acquire funding. At the time, we had application in already and was being considered by the state.
Okay, because this is your second application to extend it,
Right.
to acquire, the same reason to acquire the funding.
Yeah. So, once we get the funding in place and also the additional contract that Department of Education is expected to issue, then we can.
And are you fairly confident about getting the funding for the building, or,
We are,
yeah?
yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Castellanos?
Okay, so I think I understand what you're saying. So the funding's not from a traditional source, traditional bank. It's a loan by the state.
Correct.
Correct, okay. Do they require you to get approval for the building before you could move forward with the requests, or is it just something you have to do at the same time?
No, once they approve the funding, then for stages of the work and also for building, we have to submit.
No, what I mean,
Also, they required, at that time, they required the permit from the city.
they did, that's what I was asking, okay. All right, and are they in constant communication with you
Yeah,
about status?
We are going back and forth with them with the letters and emails.
In Sacramento, is that
Yes.
who you're dealing with? Yeah. All right, well, yeah, I know how that goes, so.
Yeah. We
Okay.
have done some things to essentially alleviate the concerns of that one neighbor we have in the back.
Right, I remember that.
And we moved the playground structure away from the wall, and we've already created that bamboo planter.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for updating us on that. That's very good of you to work with them. Just out of curiosity, what's the construction cost if you were to fund it yourself? Do you know that?
I think it's like about in the vicinity of about 400,000.
All right. That's all I've got.
I've got one more question. Are the plans done? Is it ready to, like, if you were to get funded tomorrow, do we start building, or are we still working on the
We
design?
have the preliminary plans.
Right, we do not have, we do not have the permit documents prepared at this time, but that will take a matter of a couple of
Okay,
months.
so say you got funding, what is your lead time? I mean, how long would it take before we see a building? Just ballpark.
6 to 9 months.
Yeah, I think that's all. I mean, you've answered my questions at least. One of my concerns was I was trying to wrap my head around what the funding issue is, which you've answered. And so is that something, the 2 months that you guys could work on in the meantime, so that when the state does do their part, you guys could just try to fast forward as much as possible? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that'd be cool. I know all of your future students, I'm sure, would be excited, as well as everyone else in the city who could take advantage of the school. So hopefully you guys are able to speed it up and make it happen.
Right. Yeah. We want to serve as many students as we can possibly do, because especially for families that really need the care and the education for the children, and also some of those who need some help financially that state is providing.
Okay, I believe the message is we want to see some sort of a resolution, obviously moving forward with your project, and any opportunity to make up time to finalize the project would be, I think, ideal, and that's something I would like to see, is the completion of your project as well.
Oh, yes, we would very much like to move forward as soon as we can, but it's just a matter of
Understood.
getting all these things in lined up.
Okay, call the state tomorrow morning. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead, Mr. Chairman, make a motion to approve.
Okay, motion to approve. Do we need to open it for public testimony, Jeff, now? Okay, so we have a motion,
I'll second it.
motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so jumping back to our non-hearing items, item number 5 is a study session, Code Amendment 17-03. This is revisions to the accessory dwelling units, ADU. Staff, do we have a presentation?
This will be set up in pretty much the same way as the downtown plan was. City Council adopted Code Amendment number 1701 on April 18th, 2017. If the ADU process sounds familiar, it's because that's what that Code Amendment was changing it from what used to be called second units to accessory dwelling units to comply with state law. On October 8th, 2017, the California governor signed AB 494, which is a cleanup bill for regulations for accessory dwelling units. So it cleaned up the legislation from the previous year and required the city to address some issues in our code. On December 12th, 2017, the Planning Commission initiated Code Amendment 1703 to consider revisions to standards for accessory dwelling units. So I think first time, I think, in my career that you've had 2 code amendments on the same issue in 1 year. So I'm not sure that's really that great a thing, but it is what it is. Thank you, State. Staff has worked with the City Attorney's Office to analyze standards for compliance with state law, and Scott was working with us and has helped us on this. Based on that analysis, 6 issues are provided tonight for consideration. Some of them are simple, some of them are not so simple. The first one is minimum lot size. The city currently has a sliding scale lot size requirement from 12,000 to 46,000 square foot. So in other words, some lots in the city require 12,000 square foot for a second unit or an ADU. Some require as much as 46,000, and there's several numbers in between. You can see the area districts provided and how that scale works. The minimum lot size currently required in the code is basically 6,000 square foot greater than the minimum lot size requirement in the area district. I don't know why or how, but I inherited that number. It is what it is. It's been in the code for probably 25 or 30 years at this point. The current minimum lot size standards may not comply with the methodology of the new state law that took effect in 2017. So staff, in working with the city attorney's office, came up with 4 options. 1, make no changes, leave the sliding scale in place. Option 2, require a 12,000 square foot lot size in all area districts in the city. So basically just saying every property in the city, if it's under 12,000 square feet, cannot have a second unit. If it's over 12,000 square feet, it can. Option 3, require a 13,500 square foot lot size in all area districts in the city, which is what it is in AD1, so it's 1 step from the bottom. And then option 4, require a 15,400 square foot lot size in all area districts in the city, which is area districts 2 and 2A. Staff is recommending option 2, which require 12,000 square foot lot size throughout the city. Lots of 12,000 square feet or greater generally have appropriate space to comply with the setbacks and other standards. And that's a big issue, with the ADUs, is that you want to have the space so that it doesn't cram up against, that's not a technical term, but cram up against the neighboring property and force people to have to sort of live on top of each other in one way of looking at it. We think 12,000 square foot makes sense. In working with Scott, we kind of did a perusal of the number of lots in the city, and we think it's appropriate. It's about 20% of the lots in the city are over 12,000 square feet, which we think is an appropriate number, and probably Scott thought was defensible. So that's what we're recommending.
Can you repeat that number again, Jeff? The number or percentage of lots?
About 20% of the lots are at 12,000 square feet or greater. And there are some sections of the town where it's 100% of the lots. There's other sections of the town where it's probably be 1% of the lots, because they're built in area districts, and so area district 1A has a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. So it's very unlikely that you're going to have very many lots that are over 12,000 square feet when the code allowed them to be built at 6,000 square feet. So, and then most of the southern part of town, the Woodside Village area, most of those were developed at smaller lot sizes too. There are probably a few lots, especially on cul-de-sacs or corners that V out at the back, where there may be 12,000 square foot, but most of the lots are well under that. But if you go to the eastern part of town, pretty much, probably a majority of the lots east of Azusa, definitely east of Citrus, almost every lot is over 12,000 square feet.
So the idea would be to place a minimum lot threshold of square footage so that someone can apply for an ADU. If they're unable to comply with a minimum lot size, is the variance process going to be available? And is that something we're going to entertain? Or is the idea to maybe do this as a prohibition?
Well, no, so when we set a standard, we set the standard to mean that's the standard. You can't stop someone from applying for a variance, but I think as you all know, there are findings for the variance, and they're going to be very hard to make if they don't meet the minimum lot size. And it wouldn't be our recommendation, but it'd be up to the Planning Commission and or the City Council what decisions made on a variance, but it wouldn't be staff going into this thinking that we're going to be entertaining and suggesting that people propose a variance if they're under 12,000 square feet.
And if I may, so if you have, we should say this is for an entirely new structure that you would need 12,000 square feet. State law says if you have an existing structure, you must allow an accessory dwelling unit. So that would not apply for, let's say you've got a pool house on a 8,000 square foot lot. Well, you can convert that pool house to an accessory dwelling unit, provided it meets the other requirements. Essentially, as long as you're within the same footprint, you're not expanding it, you can convert.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Any additional questions?
So we as a commission would not have the power to say we're not going to entertain variances? Is that something we could do?
Scott, do you want to comment on that?
Well, variances are allowed in very rare circumstances, and essentially they need to be because of there are particular there's some unique feature of your particular parcel that is somehow different than your neighbor's parcel. Like, your stereotypical example is, you have a triangular lot and everybody else has a rectangular lot, so therefore I need special setbacks because I can't possibly build on my property. A variance is not really appropriate for a lot size requirement. So, like as Jeff was saying, it'd be very difficult to have that apply.
Be tough to make the findings.
It'd be tough to make the findings.
Okay. So it kind of takes care of itself.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
So, I guess we just want to make sure we're comfortable with the, and I think we have some people want to speak, so we'll give
Fair
them
enough.
a chance, but comfortable with the 12,000? Okay. I'm going to take items 2 and 3 together, because they're they're both about parking, and they have to do with what the state law changed in 2017. A city may require the lesser of the number of bedrooms or 1 parking space per unit, which I find kind of humorous, but a lot of the things the state did with ADUs I find kind of humorous. The maximum parking that can be required is either 1 or 0 parking spaces, depending on the circumstances. The current code standards require 1 parking space per bedroom. So we know for a fact that you can't do that. The current code does not require an accessory dwelling unit to provide parking space if the unit is within 1/2 mile of a transit stop or bus station. So we talked about that before, just to bring your mind to that. Most of the city is within 1/2 mile. So most of the city, you can't require a parking space anyway, because it's within that criteria. The one area for sure that isn't is the southeast part of the city in the hills. That is not within that 1/2 mile, so you maybe will require parking. But the state law has modified that. So we have options: make no changes, number 1. Option 2, require 1 parking space per ADU, compliance with state law, and it'd be 1 or 0 depending on the circumstance. So I think the 0 would be if they're not proposing a bedroom, if that makes any sense. I mean, I think I have an argument with them, and I find that a little humorous too, that you're going to build a unit without a bedroom, because that's a studio, which by definition for me is a bedroom. So I don't know how I don't understand their rationale for that thought process, but I guess they're saying studios aren't bedrooms. But Ron can correct me too if I'm wrong, but I believe all the second units we've had have had bedrooms and sometimes 2 bedrooms. We've not had anybody just propose a studio up to this point in time. So we're saying comply with state law, which is option 2. And before I open up for that discussion, we'll just cover 3 as well. Require parking based on ADU being attached. The current code does not require the provision of parking spaces if the ADU is part of the existing primary residence. The new state law requires that the code not require parking even if the ADU is part of a new primary residence. So option 1 is make no changes. Option 2, revise so that no parking is required when part of an existing or new primary unit in compliance with state law. So that's, so what that's saying is if it's attached, an ADU can be attached. We usually think of them as being a separate building, but they can be attached. And so that's what it's saying. If it's attached, you can't require parking because it's sort of I guess the idea there is it's part of the main house and it has its own parking provided. I don't know. I hate to speak for the state. I'm not sure they had a thought process in mind anyway here. But so we're suggesting option 2 to comply with state law.
Just one question. Does it require that the unit be internally accessible?
It doesn't state that.
Okay.
I think that would be our goal. If we had a situation like that, which I think is actually the best situation you could have, is an attached unit that has either internal accessibility or the ability to easily convert to internal accessibility. Because that's the thing that makes sense, because we all know that there are reasons why people during their lifespan might want a second unit. And there's times when you might, and there's times that you don't want it. You may not want it, but once you build it, it's there forever. It stays with a unit. It doesn't go with a family when the reason they wanted it is no longer around. So it'd be better if you could combine and open it up and combine and, have it. That makes sense to me. But right now we haven't anybody ever proposed that. So.
Okay.
Wouldn't it just be a room then, if you could?
Well, this is an ADU, so it could have a kitchen facility, would have an exterior entrance. Okay. It would have its own, bath facility, its own living area. Okay. it would be like a suite or almost like an apartment that's
Like
attached.
a duplex or something like that.
Kind of like a duplex, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so everyone's good with option 2 on those to comply with state law. That's good. We like to comply with state law. Option 4, approval of ADUs within existing house or accessory structures. So this is what Scott was alluding to. The legislation that took effect in 2017 required that local agencies allow ADUs created from existing square footage of their primary unit over the conversion of a legal detached structure. A legal, not an illegal, but a legal structure. A section was included in the current code standards that allowed these type of conversions. However, the conditions of approval required for other ADUs were not included in the code. So in other words, we included that section there, but we sort of separated it from everything else. We think it should have these, the conditions that are listed there in the bullet points are what other proposed and new building additions require, but with conversions, we didn't include that. So it was an oversight when we prepared it. Options, option 1, make no changes. Option 2, require conditions of approval consistent with ADUs. So basically, you'd just be saying whatever you have to do for a new building that's going to be an ADU, you have to do for an existing building that's being converted. So we're recommending option 2.
Same here. Okay, we're good.
Okay. And then lastly, the more complicated one, detached structure conversions. All right, so since state law requires that existing legal detached structures can be converted to ADUs with no notification or hearings, it may be appropriate to consider standards by which detached structures are allowed. Allowed accessory structures include accessory habitable quarters, which we used to call guest houses, garages, carports, workshops, storage rooms or sheds, detached patio covers, pool, bathroom, or detached bathrooms. Since these structures can be converted to ADUs, consideration should be given to when they are allowed and what setbacks apply. So this is a nuance, and it may be a little hard to follow what I'm trying to get at here. But let's just keep in mind that for decades we approved guest houses with the idea that, well, it's a guest house, they can't make it a second unit, and we never had required garages, and they could be at 5-foot setbacks. So we have several hundred of those in town, and the state law just came in and said, no matter what you guys thought you were doing over the past 30 years, forget that. You can convert them all to second units. And anybody that builds a new one, a new AHQ, can the next year come in and propose to convert that to a ADU. So so that's what got us thinking. I will say one other thing. I can't know all the history of West Covina and how we got to where we are, but other cities I've worked for have had a fairly static rear yard setback, 20 foot, 25 foot. You couldn't build anything behind that. You might be able to build a detached garage, but you definitely couldn't do a room addition. And most of the time you couldn't even do a detached building. For whatever reason, West Covina years ago decided that we should allow additions and rooms in the rear setback as close as 5 foot. So our code has always allowed those buildings and continues to allow those buildings. And what the state did to us, they took away our ability to regulate what those buildings are. So option 1, make no changes. Option 2, consider changes to the allowed accessory structure list and or allowed development standards. Option 3, consider defining existing structure as anything constructed prior to January 1st, 2017, which was the time the conversion requirement took effect by state law. The option would be aggressive and could be challenged as non-compliance with state law. So this is something, Scott can talk about this more if it's something you want to hear about, but it's basically a way to try to address what the state did to us by defining existing structures as when they defined existing structure. And then 4, which would remove the ability for any of those older buildings built before that to convert, at least until challenged and we had an issue. Option 4, consider limiting the size of accessory structures to 500 square feet if they comply with the standards for ADUs. So staff right now is thinking that option 2 makes the most sense. Consider changes to allowed accessory structure list and or allowed development standards. If any detached structure can be converted to an ADU, it would be appropriate to have the similar standards for ADUs and other types of accessory structures. So simply put, that's saying if we're going to allow people to build an AHQ or a pool house, it should meet the standards for a ADU in terms of setback. That's the idea. And this is very nuanced and it's difficult, I understand. And it may be that the Planning Commission and City Council or City Council decide, let's make no changes, let's not panic, let's just move forward with how we have in the past. And that's fine too. But staff wanted to kind of have this discussion, just to be clear that the state played not just on West Covina, but they played a big number on a lot of cities. And they're, from my standpoint, there may be some pushback at some point in the future if this thing gets as out of control as it might in some localities. But at any rate, this is where we're at right now.
Yeah, and if I may, I want to clarify something that's stated in here, is that state law says that we must allow conversion of existing accessory structures. It doesn't define what that means, but they do point out it means it includes, but is not limited to, pool houses and I forget another one, is like storage sheds or something like that. It doesn't call out garages, it doesn't call out carports. So my conclusion is that we are not legally mandated to allow conversions of existing garages and carports to accessory dwelling units. We can allow it, and most cities do allow it, but then they also say, well, fine, you can convert your garage, but if you're going to do that, you have to have a new garage. As long you have to meet all the other requirements, as long as you have a garage, fine, go ahead. That's sort of the direction that this is going.
Is what you just stated, is that part of option 2?
Jeff, I'm trying to remember what we have drafted.
Well, option 2 is basically saying, let's look at, it is and it isn't. I mean, it could be included in that. That's basically saying, let's look at, we'd have another study session, we'd come back with the development standards that we have for these other accessory uses and where they're allowed, under what scenarios they're allowed, and look and see if we need to change the development standards for where they're allowed at.
So, if I may, I guess the question is, so clearly we are required to allow conversions of accessory structures. So does that mean to avoid an end-around game of, oh, I know, I will build a new accessory structure, and then 2 years from now, oh, suddenly I have to be allowed to convert that. So the options are, do we just leave it as is and we say fine, accessory structures, whatever, allow people to play that game? Do you define existing structure somehow to say, oh, well, it's actually existing as of right now. You can't, and if you build it in the future, you have to comply with our new rules. It's not, that's option 3. And then this is, or, okay, fine, we don't define existing, rather you have some sort of rule that says, well, okay, you can allow it in these new, you can tighten the screws a little bit on where you put these accessory structures. Fine, if a pool shed is fine, but not there, you can have it here, because if you end up converting it, then we don't have a horrible situation. Those are the options. There are obviously other options, but those are the ones that are highlighted here.
I just want to make sure that if they convert their garage, that they have a garage, that they can park there.
Yeah, we've had that conversation with folks and understand that the requirement for a garage isn't in the second unit or the ADU section of the code. It's in the R1 section of the code, so it doesn't even address that. So nothing you do in this second unit can take the place of what's in the R1 standards.
Okay.
So the idea, the way I'm, I guess, synthesizing all this is to subject any of these accessory buildings to the, I guess, the highest standards at the moment, so that in the unlikely event they come back a couple years down the road, you're kind of watertight for that already. We've already worked in what you have to do so that it allows, I guess, an easier conversion and none of this. We can't provide the parking, we can't provide the setback, et cetera.
Right, and I think my thought process is coming out of the, if you remember our discussions when we changed the guest house rules to the AHQ, part of the thing we said was windows. You need it separated so that people aren't 5 feet away from their backyard and their pool, and now there's somebody staring out the window at them all the time in their house. Those are the kind of things we talked about, but now the state is taking away our ability to restrict those things by themselves.
I get it. Any additional questions? None? Okay. We still have an item 6 here, Jeff.
We do. Now, I'm not sure, would you like us to, is option 2 what we'd want to do?
Well, I think we'll need to hear from the public.
Okay.
I think this is
Fair
questions at this point.
Fair enough. So we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
Yes, and there is an item 6. Item 6 is accessory buildings. That's the thorny one. 5 is the thorny one. This is an easy one, I think. Municipal code requires that accessory buildings or the sum of accessory buildings that are greater than 1,000 square feet require the approval of an administrative use permit. The current code standards exempts guest houses. The code no longer uses the term guest house. It's not even in the code. So it's kind of meaningless at this point. It now uses AHQs, or accessory habitable quarters. State law does not allow for discretionary use approvals of ADU. So that's the crux of the matter. That's what brought it to our attention. The state doesn't allow us to have discretionary review of an ADU. So option 1 is make no changes, leave it alone. Option 2 would be replace guest houses with accessory dwelling units. So it would exempt accessory dwelling units, not AHQ's guest houses. We're recommending option 2. There's no need to exempt accessory habitable quarters. However, ADUs should be exempt to ensure compliance with state law.
Agreed.
Okay.
No additional
So
questions.
then, if there's no questions there, I would open up the hearing, or not the hearing, this isn't a hearing, but open up for input, and then once we can finish up when we're done getting the input.
Okay, fair enough. Is there anyone present here that would be interested in speaking on this item? We do have a request to address the Planning Commission that was filled out by Jamie Lee. Feel free to come up. While you're coming up again, we'll invite anyone from the public if you want to speak on this matter. Feel free to fill out a card. Thank you.
I'm doing a civic, coming to a civic meeting, so a little nervous, but I just wanted to address the ADU code revision that has been discussed. So I want to address some of the things that were discussed, including a few other additional items. So to give you some background, I moved into West Covina with the intent of starting a family and building an ADU for a detached ADU for my elderly parents who are retired. But when I went to the city, I came up amongst some barriers that prevented me from building an ADU. And I was told about the study session, so I wanted to come and give some feedback regarding some of the hardships that I've encountered. So I also tried to look up the state statute, and also LA County Department of Regional Planning has guidelines on ADU as they've done amendments for the state statute. And I wanted to address the fact that I felt that the state and the county embodied the spirit of trying to, help the human need of, the crisis and the housing shortage and such. Whereas I felt like West Covina was creating barriers to make it difficult to make it difficult in the spirit of the law to encourage the development of ADUs. And in the discussion that I've heard today, it seems like that seems to be the case, that we're trying to limit, ADU development within West Covina. And I too don't have a background in planning and such, so I don't know what the history may be. So all I can do is present my perspective. So as it relates to a minimum lot size, the first item, I just wanted to say that from the state nor LA County requires a minimum lot size, but West Covina does. And the 12,000 square foot, as was mentioned earlier, only allows maybe 20% of the lot sizes to be eligible. And then when you factor other control measures such as 25 feet setbacks, so like in the case of my situation, I need to have 25 feet setback from the back, 25 feet from the side, 25 feet from my primary, 25 feet from my front to the front of the curb to my front of my house. I'm talking 75 feet because the ADU has to be behind my house. I don't know many people in this 20% that can qualify to these setbacks. And I'm not sure if these setbacks if there's a particular requirement for them to be that steep, but LA County only requires 6 feet between their, between separate properties, between, I'm sorry, the dwelling unit and your primary unit and such. So I'm okay with option 2 if we have to do 12,000 square feet because my property happens to qualify. But in speaking to other general members of our community who are expanding and wanting to build an ADU, for their expanding, for their extended family members and such, 12,000 is a very steep cutoff for a lot of people. It basically inhibits 80% of West Covina properties and only 20%. And within that 20%, it's even less as you count in all the setbacks, the lot coverage, all the variables. So I'm okay with 12,000 square feet because I qualify, but I don't know that we need to have a maximum, considering the county and the state doesn't have a minimum lot size. And you have all these other control measures like setbacks and the maximum square footage that you can build and lot coverage and such. The other bit is the required bedrooms. I just wanted to clarify, are we stating that we're saying that if we live within half a mile from a transit or a bus station, we don't have to have parking for an accessory dwelling unit? Okay, great, thank you. The other piece is setbacks, as was described. I know in item number 5, we're basically trying to be more stringent on the things that are accessory units now to prevent people from trying to game the system. And what I just wanted to say is most people don't want to have to game a system. It's cost prohibitive, it's very time consuming. What people want, in my case here, is I want a legal pathway to build an accessory dwelling unit for the long-term care of my extended family. And I need some way, and right now I'm limited by the setback, I'm limited by the minimum lot size, and then we happen to have, it's not the agenda, but the square footage of an ADU right now, the maximum is 800 square feet, but the state statute actually says 50% of your primary unit up to 1,200 square feet. And then when you put in all the controls in place, including your lot coverage at 35% and such, those measures will help you build a ADU that is proportional to your primary unit. And so it's not on the agenda, but I would like to request, I don't know if it's possible, for a secondary study to look at increasing the maximum for an ADU to be more than 800 square feet, to be like the state and the county's recommendation, which is 50% of your primary or up to 1,200 square feet. Oh, sorry. Can I continue? May I have another minute?
If you have another minute, that's fine.
Thank you very much. And then lastly, I just wanted to add that one additional thing in terms of control measures is also that the lot coverage in West Covina is 35% of your lot size, but actually what is included in that is also your garage and patio, things that are not even habitable space, but they are included in your lot. So it's you're conservatively creating, barriers and obstacles for people to build. So even if my primary home was, I can build 50%, I can't actually go up to 1,200 square feet because I'm limited by lot coverage. So in conclusion, I just want to say that I feel that West Covina's ADU measures, if we're looking at potentially creating some revisions, I would hope that we can revise it to a way such that the setbacks are not, these limitations don't create the barriers, because that's really against the intent and the statute to try to encourage ADU development. Because the other option is, I'm told I can convert my garage at Frankenstein, my primary home, and then move my garage to the back because the setback's only 5 feet. But that's not practical it's not practical for me to Frankenstein. I care about the aesthetics of my home and my property value. And at this point, if I don't have a pathway to legally building, I'm looking at moving elsewhere. And elsewhere, when I'm looking at property that have casitas, separate guest homes, they're very expensive. They add a lot of value, and it's an economic stimulus on our part to be able to encourage that type of building. Otherwise, people are going to choose the route of least resistance, and they're going to do inappropriate things. And I feel like these barriers, if we give people a pathway that is lenient like the county and the state, then we might have better control.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker?
I do have a question. So what is the lot size that you're trying to add on to?
Currently, my lot size is 12,000, around 12,000
Okay.
square feet, so I meet that requirement if you guys take option 2.
But not under the current
Yeah, the
limits.
current one, I
Got
need
it.
20,400, and my whole neighborhood, nobody has 20,400. So it is exactly as, it sounds about right. You basically eliminate 80% of the population in West Covina, and only 20%, just on lot size alone, only 20% qualify. And of that 20%, let's took the setback requirements, 25 feet in all different ways and separation. You can knock that down to like probably a single digit. And then from there, if you look at your lot coverage, when you include garages and anything that has a roof line is considered part of your lot coverage, and you have to use that as part of your calculation. So in my case, my home's only 2,300, but factor in the garage and the patio, I'm over 3,000 based on lot coverage, which leaves me only about maybe 1,000 square feet possibly to add for an ADU unit. But I can't even do that because I don't meet the lot requirement and I don't meet the 25 feet. I need 25 from the back, from the side, and a separation from my primary unit. I don't know many people that have 25 feet in the front, your primary unit, 25 feet between the buildings, then your secondary unit, followed by another 25 feet. That's 75 feet linear down my property. So I don't know many people that have such a big,
Right, yeah, I know what you're saying.
And then I thought about asking about variance, or what other options do I have for a legal pathway to build an ADU, but I'm told variances are,
Well, yeah, and you'll see this will be a topic of discussion. You seem to have a unique case where you want to do things right, but you kind of mentioned at the beginning of when you started speaking that you don't have a lot of background in this, but there is a lot of scenarios where people are trying to game the system.
I understand.
A lot of problems. So that's what we're trying to sort out, is to minimize those things. And also you mentioned things that like the state and county do. Definitely those are things we don't want to emulate, because usually they're one step or several steps below, at least in my view, what we want to achieve, which is one of the things that keeps property values a little higher in West Covina. But as I said, something we're looking at, and your input is very much appreciated. So thank you for coming up.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public that are interested in talking about this topic, this item? Okay, let the record reflect there are no additional comments.
I do want to clarify one statement that was made. So the state law says that if you're within half a mile of public transit is the rule, then you don't have to provide parking. Staff has taken the position that public transit includes bus lines. Some cities have taken the position that that means, less than that, but that's how staff is interpreting it.
Fair enough. Any questions, comments from the commission? Commissioner Redholz?
Well, I just want to, I agree with what Commissioner Castellano said about emulating county and state. I think, West Covina has a certain appeal and charm because of the way we do things. And I think some of these restrictions are in place for a reason. That we don't want these, we don't want these type of units just everywhere and in any situation. There has to be controls and regulations on them. We could discuss what those are, but, to make it extremely easy to do it, I don't think we want to see them all over the place. So I think that's why you have restrictions. And, they're certainly up for discussion, but I don't want to do what the county does in most instances.
Agreed. I think Commissioner Castellanos, you brought up a good point. To emulate the county sometimes, because they cover vast territory, if you really think about it. Antelope Valley, all the way down to just over the hill, a little bit away from us. So because of that, they almost have to broad brush, right? A lot of their development standards that cover a lot of territory. And I think the idea is that we would want to obviously be considerate of the public as far as what you want to do, but at the same time safeguard it, to protect it and not allow for the potential proliferation of issues that could negatively impact the well-being, the way people live, commute in and around the city. And although it is a bit tough to place restrictions on or development standards, I always believe if you have a good architect or someone that can work with you, they should be able to cobble something out, maybe buying back square footage. If you have a big patio, it sounds like you have somewhat of a large patio, you can buy back that square footage to maybe comply with the development standards as they relate to lot coverage. But I agree, I think we should hold the city, our development standards to our own standards because that's what we want. And obviously in the future, if there's an opportunity, someone could come in and maybe talk to staff about how to comply with the zoning code. And even if that means, and if we have to discuss this whole issue of a variance as well, if we want to allow it. I know that was put out there, if we want to allow it as a development standard, or I think that's why I brought up the word prohibition, is to prohibit any lot under a certain size from applying for an ADU request. But that would be my only other comment to this. Okay.
We did have number 5 that we were kind of left in limbo as we, so I want to direct our attention back to that. It may be that we don't want to do anything right now. I mean, I understand that it's a difficult thing to think through, but we would like to have some thought process on that, or some direction, I should say, on where we go with other types of detached structures.
You know, maybe I'll just start or chime in. So we're going to place restrictions on, one, you have to have a minimum lot size in order to do an ADU. Now here what we're saying is you have to comply with those standards, even if you're not doing an ADU, if you're doing an AHQ. You have to comply with the requirements of a ADU. At least that's the way
That's kind of the thought. Well, that's kind of one thought, way to go. Understanding that we don't have to allow AHQs at all.
Right. That's
not. We just do that because we decided we'd like to, but we don't have to. But yes, that is the thought process.
So I guess where I'm going with this, to me, I think the first test for anyone wanting to do an ADU is compliance with the lot size requirement, which it appears it's going to screen out about 80% of the properties in the city. So it really leaves a unique group of properties left that may be able to proceed. So the idea is because they have the minimum lot size, they should be able to comply with setbacks, et cetera. Hence, maybe it makes sense to require even an AHQ. I would almost seem to say anything that's enclosed to potentially comply. I'm somewhat on the fence when it comes to a carport, because a carport is, in terms of the construction, it doesn't necessarily apply well if you were to convert that over into a ADU, I would think, unless you engineer it and design it accordingly. I just don't see someone investing all that money in a carport to eventually come back and convert it into enclosed. Agreed, right. So, but I can see it maybe happening with a garage, a very, how would you say, beefy garage, or a large garage. It can be pre-engineered so that it could be heated eventually down the road, drywalled, et cetera. So that's my thought. I guess where I'm going with this is I would say probably, yeah, we should subject specific structures maybe to the idea that they have to comply with ADU, if they meet that criteria, if maybe they're enclosed on three of the 4 sides of the structure, or all 4 maybe.
Yeah, it might be easier just to say that if it's an enclosed structure,
okay,
and leave it open structures. And I'm not sure, as I look at the list, I'm not sure bathrooms are going to be that big a concern, because if it's just a bathroom, it's going to be 100 square feet or something by itself. But at any rate, I see what you're getting at. I didn't mean to stymie the conversation.
No, I mean, I was just throwing it out there to see if maybe that provides some direction or traction with the rest of the commission. That's it for me.
So Jeff, if we go with option 2, we'll be bringing it back to discuss which,
Yeah, I think that's what we do, is if we go with option 2, and we'll work with Scott a little bit, because he might have some other ideas there, that maybe, I mean, I think we all agree that we want to have the simplest solution. And so we want to flesh that out. So part of this discussion, I think, is helping us do that, including the input from Ms. Lee. So that's what, you're exactly right, that's what would happen. We'd bring it back, hopefully in not too distant future, because I want to move this one fairly quickly. So I think we'd bring it back in February for some kind of discussion, because it's just the one item. Get that flushed out, then we can prepare the language that comes in with the code amendment.
okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I like option 2.
Okay. Just one last quick question for Jeff, yourself or Scott. Are you aware of any other cities that have placed caps or minimum requirements for ADUs in terms of the lot size?
It's a very common requirement. I was just at a public hearing last week in which there was an analysis of standard lot sizes, et cetera, and they ran, all over the map as far as the size requirements. And I would say, I don't recall the exact numbers, but certainly maybe 50% of the cities required had some sort of a lot size requirement. I don't know if it was 50% or say, but a lot had lot size requirements.
Maybe in legal terms, a measurable number.
A measurable number. I wish that I could be more precise. I don't remember if it was 30% or 70%, but it was a substantial number.
Okay,
had
fair
lot
enough.
size requirements.
So it's definitely more than 10%.
Undoubtedly, yes.
Good, okay.
I think we have the information we need to proceed with that. So we can move on to the other items in the agenda.
All right, so we will close that item. That pretty much concludes the non-hearing items of our agenda this evening. We do have a continuation of oral communication. Communications, I should say, I apologize. Anyone interested in talking on items that are not agendized this evening, this is your opportunity to come back up and speak. Okay, let the record reflect there is no one here for continuation of oral communication. Moving on to commission reports, comments, and miscellaneous items. Commissioner Redholz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to let everyone know that I attended the groundbreaking yesterday for Portos. So for those of you that still don't believe they're coming, I think that should dispel that. They're coming. They've made quite a commitment, to the city. They're going to, as we saw when it was in front of us, they're going to put in a beautiful structure. It's going to really be a go-to place. The location, right off the freeway. They're going to invest, I think Mr. Porter was telling me it's going to cost them about $150,000 to upgrade and update the sign that's there. They have to, put the new screen. They have to, what's there now is just simply words, and they want to, have detailed animation and color and all that to, show the pastries and so forth. And they're going to hire, I think he said about 150 to 170 full and part-time people. It's going to bring in roughly $80,000 into the general fund every year. And he was saying that they've definitely learned from some mistakes, I guess was the word he used at Buena Park, as far as not anticipating the crowds. They're anticipating, big crowds, and they're going to be ready for it. And they've got, it's a good family-run business, going to have good staff, and, it's going to be an exciting addition to the city of West Covina. And it was nice to go out there. They had samples and sandwiches and pastries and everything, and, they got our mouths watering for sure. So we're looking forward to Portos. Thank you.
Looking forward to Portos. Commissioner Castellanos, you looking forward to Portos as well?
Looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I missed the grand opening, but
Likewise.
I saw the pictures. So
You'll be there for the grand opening.
or the groundbreaking, yes. That's what. definitely be there for the grand opening. Looking forward to it, yeah.
I'll be there when they fire up the oven. How about that? Planning Director's report.
On the Planning Director's report tonight, we have the forthcoming, which we do have items for the next Planning Commission meeting on the 13th of February. So don't go out of town. Take your vitamins so you'll be healthy. And then project status report is provided for you on the projects that the Planning Commission has approved over the last few years and what's still in the pipeline and working towards construction. That's all I have to.
I see that there's this American Beauty College, which I thought, isn't that already there? American Beauty College?
Yes, it's moving to a
It's
new
moving?
location.
Okay.
A very close location, I think, but it's a different address, so it's not the same site.
Okay, and then also in the mall, in the plaza, where the Marinello School of Beauty was, there's another beauty, I think it's called Salon, I forget the name of it.
Yeah.
Salon Select, I forget what the name is, but does that have to come in front of us for?
We worked with them, I think they already have a business license, to use the Marinello's approval.
Oh, I see,
So
so,
they have that approval.
okay, so that's a done deal.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, yeah, that's where I believe it's at.
Okay.
I know we work with them, and I don't know where exactly they're at in the process, but I believe they have a business license because we approved it.
So they can use the Marinello?
Yes.
Okay, go forward. Okay, great, thank you.
Any council actions, Jeff?
No, wow. Nothing to report, although we are planning on having the temporary sign hearing that you guys just approved on the 6th. So that would be the one thing to be upcoming, but nothing to report from the last meeting.
Okay, I think we're ready to adjourn then. Let the record reflect, it's 9:24. This is the conclusion of the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, January 23rd, 2018. Thank you for coming out this evening.